To comprehend what's happening now, you have to understand the history of Mexican cartels, and it begins in the 1970s with the Guadalajara cartel. Professor David Shirk is the director of the Justice in Mexico program at the University of San Diego. He says the Guadalajara cartel had sole control of drug trafficking in Mexico until they killed a DEA agent. That's when the U.S. pressured Mexican leaders to go after them.
And in the aftermath, the Guadalajara cartel split into three different criminal organizations that controlled different territories in Mexico. The Arellano Felix family controlled the city of Tijuana.
The Arellano Felix family controlled Tijuana until the Sinaloa cartel challenged them in the mid to late 2000s. That fight for Tijuana resulted in some of the deadliest years in the city's history. When one cartel controls a city, there's relative peace. But violence increases when rival groups challenge that dominance.
Whenever there is a situation where there's not a dominant criminal organization operating in a given area, that's when you have violence, right? Because if you control the territory, there's no need to fight. But when a territory is contested, that's when there is fighting.
That seems to be what's happening in Tijuana right now. Shirk says that Tijuana's recent violence is linked to a fight between the Sinaloa cartel and a rival organization known as the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación.
There's a local story, I think, about the changing dynamics of security in Tijuana. There's also a larger story about the new generation cartel that is has been really for the last several years trying to assert itself as Mexico's new dominant cartel.
But who is this new organization? Vanda Felbab Brown studies organized crime for the Brookings Institution. She agrees that we're seeing a repeat of what happened in the 2000s when the Sinaloa cartel took on the Arellano Felix organization. But there's one big difference. The Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación is much more violent.
The latest escalation is not just the repeat of the mid-2000s, but in some ways even more dramatic than the mid-2000s, because the new factor there is Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, which has embraced what the Zetas did previously. It tries to rule through brutality, iber-alles. It tries to be more brutal than anyone else. And its standard modus operandi is resorting to very dramatic, very brazen violence.
Now, the Sinaloa cartel is no stranger to violence, but its leaders prefer to work behind the scenes. They try to buy off politicians and offer food and even social programs to poor communities. In contrast, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación used social media and public spectacles of violence to terrorize communities into submission.
Between the choice of the violent criminal of the Sinaloa cartel and the violence of Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, life tends to be much more brutal, much more difficult under Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación's rule.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador visited Tijuana Friday. He downplayed the violence and said the military is taking care of the issue. Right now, there are 3,000 members of the Mexican National Guard patrolling Tijuana. Yet every expert KPBS spoke with said the current wave of violence is the direct result of the Mexican government's over-reliance on the military to confront organized crime. Cecilia Farfán Méndez is the co-founder of the Mexico Violence Resource Project. She says that Mexico's security strategy is clearly not working.
I think events like, not only Tijuana, but, in terms of thinking, what does this mean? I'm like, well, this means that the state increasingly looks weaker in relation to criminal groups.
Stephanie Brewer is director for Mexico at the Washington office on Latin America. She also says that doubling down on militarization is a mistake.
And unfortunately, what we have seen over the past really 10, 15 years is a lot of repetition of the same go-to strategies, which consist largely of military deployment. And we saw it again in these last couple of days.
She says that there's no clear evidence that the strategy even works.
Everyone who has analyzed this problem within Mexico, outside of Mexico, or once again, you just ask anyone on the street, you ask the population, what's allowing criminals to operate with the freedom that they do. And it's because there's no reliable system that would bring about consequences or that would provide truth, and justice for those crimes.
So what's the takeaway? Was last week's violence a sign of more to come, or just a flash in the pan? Shirk and the other experts aren't sure. They have no way of knowing, and that's by design.
As is so often the case, what's going on in this criminal underworld in the shadows here is like impossible for us to really know what's going on because it's like shadow puppetry. And so you think you're seeing something, you think you understand what messages are being sent, but you really don't have any way to confirm.
Yet, a couple of things are clear. As long as rival cartels are fighting for control of Tijuana, we should expect more violence to continue until someone comes out on top. And even then, it won't be lasting peace.
So eventually, presumably, one of the criminal groups or a coalition could win. We will perpetually be in situations where whatever quote unquote peace there is really just a narco peace. It's a peace that is totally at the discretion of the criminal groups. That is not because the state has developed effective policies.
Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.